Welcome everyone to the latest installment of the Portent webinar series. My name is Colin Parker and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar, How to Create a Successful International SEO Strategy with Caitlin McMichael, who's our resident expert on international SEO here at Portent. We'd love it if you'd all join in on this webinar. There are a couple of ways you can do that. One is by asking your questions within the questions pane of GoToWebinar, and the other is by tweeting your questions using the hashtag PortentU. So that's #PortentU. This presentation is going to have a lot of actionable info for webmasters and developers, just as a disclaimer for you marketers. Caitlin is going to unpack a lot of this for you, but if any of it is a little bit technical, we'd be happy to answer your business questions in the Q&A session afterwards, or you can always get in touch with us either on Twitter or giving us a shout on the website itself. And just so you all know, in case you miss out on any of today's webinar or you want to review it later, don't worry. Tomorrow you're going to receive a follow-up email which will contain a link to the recorded webinar, a SlideShare link to the presentation slides from Caitlin, and a bit.ly link bundle which will contain all of the links to the resources that Caitlin will be referencing in her webinar. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Caitlin. Hey Caitlin.
Hey Colin, thanks for that excellent introduction. Welcome everyone to this webinar about formulating the best international SEO strategy for your online business. It's my pleasure to be speaking with you today on this subject. So first, I'd like to talk a little bit about Portent as a company and explain my role here. Portent is one of the leading digital marketing agencies, and we're located in Seattle, Washington. We've been around since 1996, so we're coming up on our 20th anniversary next year. So as a company and a team of world-class marketers, we really know our stuff, and it's been my privilege to work at Portent. A little bit about me: I've got about 5 years experience working in online marketing, including SEO, both in an in-house setting and now with Portent in an agency setting. I've worked with companies of many different sizes with varying goals when it comes to international SEO. And a little fun fact about me, I'm really into salsa dancing these days. All right, so let's get started and talk about the purpose and the scope of this webinar. This webinar is meant to be primarily an introduction to international SEO strategy, and specifically about how to start planning on the best approach for expanding your sites into global markets. So by clearly defining how we can weigh the different factors involved in creating your international SEO strategy, you'll be better able to understand what the best approach is for your business specifically. So what this webinar will not do is make you an international SEO expert. And it won't replace a personal SEO consultant. So this is, after all, only a webinar. I won't be able to go over all the different aspects of international SEO. But let's talk about what we can cover, and that is, first, the definition of what do I mean by international SEO. I really want to break it into 3 parts: strategy, technical, and content. Of course, this webinar will be focusing mostly on strategy, but I'll briefly talk about technical and content, because those really do matter and they help with setting up and understanding strategy. So we'll briefly talk about those other aspects. So let's first talk about how to go about creating an international SEO strategy. Remember, it's hard enough trying to rank well in one country, and so ranking internationally isn't easier. So it's important to set clear expectations about expanding into new markets, that it's not going to automatically give your sites an influx of new traffic. It's going to be hard work to create unique web experiences that are geared for new international markets. So one thing to note about international SEO is it's not meant to manipulate keyword rankings so that you can be at the top of the search engine results page in every country. Instead, it's about creating unique, customized content that is tailored specifically for users in a certain language or country. And another important thing to note is that online businesses have unique business needs, which makes a one-size-fits-all approach to international SEO about as common as a unicorn sighting. So I really won't be able to dive deep into specific use cases, but hopefully in the Q&A we will have time to address any specific questions that you might have about your company. International SEO is a tricky subject. Every brand has unique situations to consider. And if you look at the Google documentation about international SEO, it's really high level. It doesn't really give you advice on the best approach for structuring your site in a way that makes sense for your brand. So there is a flowchart on our Portent blog, and there's the link to it. This I created because, in part, international SEO strategy is so tricky that you really need to have kind of a flowchart or a chain of questions and answers that you can ask yourself in order to go about creating an international SEO strategy. So I recommend after the webinar taking a look at that flowchart. You'll get a really nice sense of the flow of questions, and we'll go over some of the content of that in our discussion today. So some of the questions that you might ask when you're first thinking about what the best approach is for your company is these questions here. So I put 4 up here, and we'll dive deep into each one of these in the coming slides. Resources, so what kind of resources do you have available to you? What are the costs involved? What's the best approach for structuring your site? And what's the potential for return on investment? So the first question is to ask yourself whether you honestly have the resources available to manage international content. Do you have design and development resources to handle multiple sites? Do you have writers to develop unique localized content and professional translations? Do you have the budget and savvy marketing team who's capable of doing regional link outreach? All of these things are determining factors in deciding whether to go with separate sites or not. So if you don't have the resources to accomplish all of that, then perhaps you're not ready to go international. Or you will want to take the subfolders route and keep all of your content in one domain. That's another option. Another thing to take into consideration before you're going ahead with a strategy is looking at the costs. So a lot of costs involved include regional link outreach, content creation, professional translations, local servers, the cost of SEO consultants, and the cost of developers. So be mindful of that when you're thinking of how to calculate return on investment. There is a lot that goes into investing and doing international SEO right. So here I've got a really basic formula for calculating ROI. First, you have to look at anticipated revenue from SEO efforts. What do you stand to gain when it comes to rolling out your new sites? Minus the proposed cost of the project. And we just talked about the costs involved. So then you take that number, you divide it by the proposed cost of the project to get your anticipated ROI. And there's also a really handy link here to internationalSEOmap.com, where they have an ROI calculator that's geared specifically for calculating international SEO ROI projects. So I recommend taking a look at that, and it takes into consideration conversion rate and conversion value. So it's also a great tool to use. The next thing to understand when you're going about setting up your strategy is choosing your target markets wisely. You need to know whether there's significant search volume for the countries or languages that you're interested in targeting, because it wouldn't make sense to target a language or country combination where there's hardly any people in that market. So you need to be judicious and set realistic expectations about what markets you really want to expand into before you go about overextending your empire like Alexander the Great. So if there isn't significant search volume, or if traffic from certain countries doesn't convert well, then those markets may not be worth pursuing. Got a couple tools here that I recommend using for doing this kind of thing. So with keyword research, that's a really good place to start. There's a lot of keyword research tools out there, like the AdWords Keyword Planner tool, SEMrush, a lot of tools that you can actually segment by language or country. And Suggest Mixer also is kind of like Uber Suggest and lets you segment by countries and languages. So I recommend checking out those. It's a good place to start and see, is there anyone in those target markets that's actually searching for your product or service? Another really common question about keyword research and how you should go about targeting your markets is, should you target by language or country? So here's this great graph from Kissmetrics. I recommend following this when you're trying to evaluate, should I go by language or country? If you've got a lot of traffic and conversions from each country, and if you've got the resources to target by country, then go ahead and do that. But if you don't have the bandwidth to target by country, language targeting is a really good option. It's much broader, and so you don't have to segment your sites as much as you would with country targeting. All right, so now we are at the point where we can talk about the main options for structuring your site or sites. There's three main options. The top level domains, generally a really good option. Directories or subfolders is another option, and then there's subdomains. You can find on Google's documentation the pros and cons of each, and we'll talk about the pros and cons of each and go in depth. So let's break down what each of these is and why you might want to consider each one of these. So top level domains. Here's an example of who is using these already. So lots of big brands do go with this option. TripAdvisor, Amazon, Freelancer, these all use top level domains, or CCTLDs, which means country coded top level domains. An example of a country coded top level domain would be tripadvisor.co.uk. That's a top level domain country coded for the UK. Some of the pros and cons of choosing a top level domain structure. So pros, really clear geolocation signals. So Google tends to like top level domains because they give very clear signals of who they're trying to target. There's really no ambiguity if you have a top level domain that's, for instance, co.uk, that you're trying to target UK users. Also, server location is irrelevant. The top level domain tells the search engine which country you're targeting already. And also there tends to be an increased click-through rate from users who prefer local domains. So for example, French users, if they see .fr in the search result pages, and your top level domain has a French domain extension, then they're likely going to click on that URL knowing that that site is designated or tailored specifically for French users. So you tend to see higher click-through rates and also higher conversion rates and average spend, since French users, for example, tend to like French sites, and that's true for a lot of users in different locations, where if they feel like your site is specifically designed for them, then they're going to know they're in the right place and put more trust in your product or service. Some of the cons or negative aspects of top-level domains is that it requires more IT resources to set up and maintain multiple sites. Another really big factor in terms of SEO is that it splits link authority among several domains. And there's also really strict requirements for top-level domains in some countries. For example, in Australia, in France, in Germany, you have to have a physical presence, whether that's an administrative contact who can receive mail in that location, or if it's headquarters. It depends on the domain extension. But you do need to think about that before going ahead with top-level domains as your approach. So I recommend, is a really good approach for those who have large audiences in each of their target countries. They have lots of resources to invest in development, design, content, and SEO. And if they have significantly different product catalogs or services for each region, Amazon's a good example of that. And if they have offices and a physical presence in each of these target countries, then top-level domains is a really good bet. The next option for structuring your site is subfolders. So what I mean by that are, if you have all of your content on one domain and you have subfolders that target different languages or countries, then you can have all of your content under one roof, essentially. You don't have to create and maintain multiple sites. Here's a couple examples of big sites that are using subfolders as their country or language targeting. Spotify, Microsoft, IKEA, they all use country targeting via subfolders. Skype is another example. They use subdirectories or subfolders to language target. You can do either one. The pros and cons involved with this approach. So the pros: one consolidated backlink profile. That's really important when thinking about SEO, because if you've got all of your content consolidated under one domain, then you can benefit from having a consolidated backlink profile. You can have more domain authority than you would if you split out your content into separate sites. They're also easy to set up and manage. You can geo-target by country within Webmaster Tools, and you have low maintenance costs since everything's under one roof. Now the problem there with subfolders, there's a couple. You cannot set up local servers, and it does have a weaker signal to search engines than top-level domains. So I recommend this approach for those with limited resources to build and maintain multiple sites. And if you have limited resources for investing in regional link outreach and all that, then this is a really good approach because you have everything under one roof. You don't have to invest as much into putting the word out there and getting quality links to each of your domains because you have everything pointing to one domain. The third option are subdomains. There's also a lot of websites that use this approach. Shop uses subdomains to country target. WordPress.com uses language targeting via subdomains. You can use either country targeting or language targeting. Craigslist uses subdomains on a city level, so there's a lot of options with subdomains for targeting. Some of the pros and cons of each. First, pros, let's talk about how subdomains are really easy to set up. You already have the domain. You can generally create subdomains pretty easily. You can use Webmaster Tools for geo-targeting. Also, you can set up different servers for each of those subdomains, and there's an easy separation of sites. So those are some positives, and also in some cases, but not all, the subdomain will retain some of the domain authority from the main domain. But in most cases, that's not the case. Some of the cons of going with this approach are that users can't really recognize the targeting that you might choose. For example, if you want to target German by language, so you have a subdomain set up de.example.com, then it's not quite clear, because it's not standard, whether that's German or Germany or what that actually stands for. There's no standardization of the subdomain targeting, so it becomes kind of ambiguous about what subdomain you're targeting there. Another thing is that it requires more IT resources than, say, subfolders to set up and maintain. and in most cases it does split link authority among subdomains. There's also a higher risk of mislinking, so that means that if you have a subdomain, for example, that de.example.com, and you ask for a friend in Germany to link to your German site, but they accidentally link to your www.example.com version, then you've got a really great link that's no longer pointing to the relevant country subdomain. So you can get, a lot of times you'll end up getting your links pointing to your main domain or to the wrong subdomain. So there's a higher risk there of mislinking. For subdomains, we recommend this approach for those who want to keep their brand name in the main domain, but separate out the international sites onto subdomains. This is generally not the best approach for most companies because subdomains, again, they don't have that backlink profile that's consolidated under one domain, and they don't have the clear geolocation signals that you can get from top level domains. So they don't have any distinct advantages over the other two options. Here's a really great graph that shows visually the amount of earnings that you can expect over time for each of these options. So the light blue line is country-coded top-level domains. That starts out being the least in terms of earnings, but then over time it will be the best performer for ROI. Then you've got subdomains being the blue line there that's kind of starts out as a middling underperformer, and then you've got subfolders being the darker blue that starts out with the best performance at the beginning, but then in the end does not quite offer the same level of earnings that you can expect with, say, a top-level domain. So I did mention a lot of different examples in there, Amazon, TripAdvisor, of how they target by language or by country, by subdomain or by subfolder. And I found all of this using a really awesome site called nerdydata.com. I highly recommend this if you're wondering how some of the big brands target UK users or how they use hreflang. What you do is you add in a piece of code like just hreflang and into the search box, and then it'll show you the most popular sites on the web that use that annotation. So you can easily find all the brands that are using hreflang. So I just used the word hreflang, and I probably should talk about it now, so let's get into the more technical section. So hreflang, what it is a piece of code, and you add it into either your page tags on your pages that you want to target by language or by country, or you can add it into sitemaps. And I'll talk about the different ways to implement it. So here's an example of what hreflang as a page tag looks like. So you've got a link element where you've got rel equals alternate, hreflang equals es-es, and then you have the link. What this does is it tells search engines, specifically Google and Yandex, what that page in the link element there, what the language and the country is that page targets. So the ES in the lowercase is indicating language, and then the ES in uppercase is the country. Each of those codes are using ISO code format. I have a link there to ISO codes for languages and for countries, and you have to follow those language codes exactly. There's really no margin for error when implementing these hreflang tags. Let's talk a little bit about the purpose of hreflang. So the purpose is not to affect rankings anyway. It's specifically meant to help search engines understand the relationship among your pages so that you can show the right content to the right users. hreflang is really what makes international sites work. It's designed to allow companies to target audiences by language or by country. And so the whole point is if you create unique web experiences for your different audiences, then hreflang ensures that the right audience sees the right content. It's going to prevent cannibalization of the wrong content outranking the right content. So, for example, if you keep seeing in Google's version of Australia that your Canadian content is outranking your Australian content, then you have an issue most likely with hreflang implementation. So getting hreflang 100% correct is what will make sure that the right content is shown to the right users. Another thing that hreflang is meant to do is to reduce duplicate content issues. So if you have multiple versions of your site targeting, say, multiple versions of English, Irish English or UK English or Canadian English, all of those are different aspects of or dialects of English, for example, then that could be seen as duplicate content and you'll risk having the wrong content displayed to the wrong user. So hreflang is meant to fix that by telling the search engines what the relationship is among your pages and thereby removing duplicate content issues. There's a couple tools I recommend when creating hreflang annotations for your site. The first one is a hreflang generator, so you select the country or the language you want to target, and then it'll tell you the exact hreflang code to put on your page. And then if you already have hreflang implemented on your site, but you want to make sure that it's correct, then check out this hreflang validator tool. So there's three options for hreflang. There's page tagging, there's XML sitemaps, and HTTP editors. So page tagging and XML sitemaps most common, so we'll talk about those a little bit more. HTTP editors are really good for PDFs and places where you can't add a page tag. Here's an example of how TripAdvisor has page tag hreflang annotations on their homepage. So if you look at the page source on tripadvisor.com, you'll see that they have a lot of hreflang tags right there on the page targeting 30 or so websites. They're all other versions of their homepage. So they have hreflang targeting languages, targeting countries, and it's all marked there on the page, so all the different homepages are listed as one group. So that's the important part of hreflang, is you make sure you don't leave any of the pages out when you're grouping pages together. Here's an example of a sitemap where you add in hreflang annotations. This example is pulled directly from Google's documentation about how to do this. So in this example, you have an English language page targeted at English speakers worldwide. You also have equivalent versions of this page targeted at German speakers worldwide, and then also German speakers located in Switzerland. So you need to make sure that each of the pages appears in the location element, highlighted in yellow, each one time, and then with its other two alternates plus itself in green. So you've got one page grouping with 3 pages, and it's repeated 3 times throughout the sitemap here, each time with one of the URLs highlighted in yellow. So each URL gets its time to shine in the spotlight when it's referenced in the sitemap. So this may seem really repetitive and kind of confusing, but this is how it has to be done in order for a search engine crawler to understand each of the pages in the group and how they need to be referenced as one group. If you don't do this correctly, or if you have hreflang tags on the page that are not reference correctly, if you leave any page in a group out, then what you'll get in Webmaster Tools is a warning, and it'll say no return tag errors. And those no return tag errors mean that if you have page A, B, and C, but page A doesn't link back to page B, then it can't make that association among all of those pages. So it will get confused and return an error. So when you see these errors show up in Webmaster Tools, that's what you need to be thinking about, checking your sitemaps or your page tags to see if any page in that group was left out. All right, I also want to talk quickly about auto redirection, some of the other technical things that you need to think about when setting up your international sites. So auto redirection, you can do it, but I recommend avoiding it. It can really bother the user when it's not done correctly. And also, more importantly for search engines, is that if you are automatically redirecting them to another portion of your site, then it can prevent the crawler from viewing all parts of your site. So it can really mess up indexation. Also, I want to talk about the new locale-aware crawlers that Google announced earlier this year. It may have seemed when this was first announced that it would replace hreflang and allow webmasters to create regional content on the same URLs. But Google's stance on the locale-aware crawlers do not replace hreflang. They've been clear about that. It doesn't change any of the recommendations we've already outlined. It's basically the idea is that Googlebot has the ability now to crawl a website from different parts of the world rather than just from the US, for example. So they have the ability now to accept language headers and also to crawl from different IP addresses. So it's an advancement in the crawler's ability to view websites as if they were different users around the world, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't use hreflang. So here's an example of auto redirection gone wrong, or where they're targeting the wrong, really it's the wrong approach to setting up their home pages for international audiences. So here's car2go.com. Whenever you type that in, you get taken to their Austin page. And that's an example of a really poor user experience where they don't realize that I'm actually in Seattle. So they need to reevaluate how they have that redirect and have it sent to just EN rather than Austin or something like that, where they're not directing all US traffic to Austin. So if you do want to go this route and auto redirect users, just make sure that you present the user with a really unobtrusive message, not a pop-up, not an interstitial, something that asks the user if they want to choose a more relevant version of your site, but that's not super annoying like a pop-up. And also, you want to make sure that you do have a language selector box. This is a good idea because it can allow the user, if they do want to switch to a different version, they can do that manually. And it also helps with the interlinking of sites. So you make sure that all versions of your site are accessible to search engines and to users. The FT.com Financial Times, they've got a nice little language selector box. It doesn't have to be super obtrusive. It's just visible if you want to find it. Also, don't use a pop-up window. Here's an example of a site where they use a pop-up window every single time you go to their site, and you have to select your country of residence every single time you visit. They don't ever have a cookie remembering your preference, so that's not an ideal situation. A much better situation would be to direct them to the homepage, and then via an unobtrusive little message box, they could say, it looks like you're from the US, and do you want to switch to the US? And that would be a much better experience than this pop-up window with the beautiful homepage obscured by a gray background. Let's talk quickly about some content considerations for when you're setting up and developing your international sites. So content is kind of a big deal. It's important to realize that you can't just duplicate all versions of your site as if they're going to be sufficient to target other audiences across the globe. You really want to make sure that you're aiming for as unique and high quality as possible when you're thinking about your content. That's why I always recommend getting professional translators who can translate your content into their native tongue, use regional vernacular and spellings, make sure that the currency of that location is the default option, and the local office addresses, if you have them, all of those should be visible on the page. The reason is, there's a couple reasons. First, for users, it helps them know that they're in the right place. And also for search engines, it helps them know that you're targeting that specific audience. So hreflang is good to help them understand that, but these other options here about localizing your content, those are also signals of quality that you're going to be able to pass on to search engines, that they'll understand that you're truly targeting this specific audience. So when you're going about trying to regionalize your content, make sure that you're looking for ways to do that in the URLs, the metadata, navigation labels, headings, all of those places where you would focus on with a normal SEO campaign. You want to make sure you're focusing on for your international SEO campaign as well. Here's an example of regional vernacular and how they vary from place to place. And this is why having a professional translator take a look at your keyword research and your content, and then incorporating the nuances of that language into your site. That's going to help both users understand that you're creating content specifically for them, and it's also going to help with ranking and with search engines who are trying to understand what location you're targeting. So a little bit about keyword research and translation. First, I recommend just doing keyword research as you would normally do for any site, and then hand off that keyword list to a professional translator. So once keyword lists are ready to go and you've rolled that out, then you can move on to the next phase, which is link building. And I would approach this just as any other link building campaign, where you're really trying to focus on building relationships, capitalizing on the relationships that you already have, and focusing on quality over quantity. But with the difference with international link building or regional link building is that you want to make sure that you're getting links from local sites that point to your local content. So for example, with a German site, make sure that you're reaching out to sites with German top-level domains that are written in German, asking them for links to your German content. That will really help with ranking and make sure that the right content, for example, your German content is going to have enough page authority to rank well in the search engines in Germany. So with that, I'd like to thank you for listening in on this webinar. I hope that it helped to clarify some of the different factors that need to go into the decision-making process before moving ahead with an international SEO campaign. I often see brands that have made mistakes in implementation or that did not really think through with their plan and are left with not very flattering results. But by taking all these things into consideration, you'll be in much better shape for figuring out the best approach for your business and being able to set realistic goals and expectations for your organic revenue. So I'd also like to point out in the link to the bit.ly link bundle at the bottom of this slide, you can go check that out now. or after the webinar, it's going to have all the links that I've discussed in this webinar, including this slide deck. So with that, I'd love to answer any questions you might have about the content we've already covered, or if you have specific questions about implementing international SEO on your site.
Thanks, Caitlin. That was extremely informative. And don't forget that you're going to get all of the resources Caitlin referenced via the Bitly link bundle, which you'll find here, but also we'll ship this out via email. Questions, again, you guys can answer or can address those through the questions pane of GoToWebinar, but you can also tweet them in with the hashtag #PortentU. So let's start with some of the questions that we got during the webinar from attendees. First one here from Christina Urban. How does TripAdvisor, for example, and tripadvisor.co.uk handle duplicate content? That's fantastic. We actually used that specific example. I think that question was asked right as we were going into that. So thanks, Christina, for that great setup. If you guys have follow-up questions about hreflang, specifically that approach, we can get into that in a little bit more depth. Feel free to keep asking. Alex, on the same note, asks, this is such a great presentation, but we missed part of it. Hope there will be a recording so you can reference it later. Yes, absolutely. So you'll be able to go back and see some of the discussion around hreflang with the visuals there. Next question is from Charles. Is the order of the hreflang tags on the page important? For example, should a default come after a specific country?
Yeah, those are great questions. So I'll tackle Charles's first. Is the order of hreflang tags on a page important? The answer to that is no, not really. You can put them in any order, just as long as every page in that group shows up all together. So you want to make sure that you're referencing page A, page B, page C. Every page that that your language or country targeting shows up all together on each of those pages. The order, not so much, just as long as they're all together. Great.
Next question is from Marianne Sweeney, and the question is, if you optimize for google.com, are you optimized also for instance, google.fr?
Yeah, that's another great question. So if you optimize for google.com, are you optimized for google.fr or another domain? So if you're focusing on Google US, you're going to see some optimization carry over to other countries, but you really want to focus on making sure, if you want to rank in France, that you're focusing on French users and presenting them with a really great user experience when they come to the French version of your site.
Absolutely, that's fantastic. And Joshua asks and rescinds a question about international link building having an impact domestically. I just thought that was such a fantastic point that Caitlin made about needing to make sure that you do prioritize some local link building as you're trying to get specific regional content to rank. Yes, absolutely. I think there's carryover. Caitlin, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, definitely. So if you're seeing UK rankings outrank your US rankings or vice versa, then you either have a problem with hreflang or you have an issue with link building. So you might want to look at seeing if there's UK sites that are linking to your US sites, and then asking those webmasters and saying, thank you so much for being our link partner, but would you please link to our UK version? I think it would be a much more relevant experience if you send users to the UK version of your site. That way you're making sure that you're getting regional links to your regional pages.
Excellent. Next question, one more from Marianne. Does it make a difference if you use machines to translate page content into language of origin, or should you use human translators for more effective placement?
So with translation, the best situation is always to go with professional translations. You want to make sure that you're hiring someone who understands the audience and who can capture the nuances of that language. And a professional translator is really the only way to go about doing that. Machine translations, on the other hand, can actually be a signal of really low quality and even a signal of spam. So I highly recommend staying away from machine translation as much as possible.
And Tim asks a great question. How hard is it to switch from ccTLD to a language-centered approach after the fact? How much should actually go into the planning as a result?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when you're thinking about switching from one format to another, whether that's from top-level domains to subfolders or any other of the options presented with International SEO, you want to make sure that you're planning as much as you would with a normal site migration, where if you're planning a normal site migration, you need to think about the redirects very carefully and make sure that you have the guidance of an SEO expert who can make sure that the transition is very smooth and that old URLs get redirected and indexed as those new URLs, so that you have to think about switching from one format to another with the same amount of care and concern as you would with a normal site migration. That being said, if you do want to switch from top-level domains to something that allows you to do language targeting, that's fine. Just make sure that you're very careful about those redirects. I would definitely have an SEO expert take a look at those and try to avoid making a lot of changes. So the reason for that is every time you make a site migration, you can lose some of the domain authority that you've built up with those sites. So you want to move forward with drastic changes like that with a lot of caution. And that being said, if you're thinking about the best approach, think about the future and what's going to be the best long-term for your company and your brands.
Okay, Steve G asks, are there any cases where you would think that having a language-based approach instead of a country-coded top-level domain would put off your customers?
I suppose so. I mean, it's you want to think about the amount of targeting that you want to do and the amount of effort that you want to put into getting as granular as possible. So if you really have the bandwidth and the resources to do country targeting, that's going to be much more specific than doing language targeting. So for example, targeting German speakers in Switzerland rather than just Germans. German users in Switzerland are going to receive a much more specific level of targeting, and they're gonna, if you do it right, they're gonna feel like when they encounter your webpage that it's meant specifically for them. That's gonna be a really great experience, but of course it takes more effort. So to get back to the question about would language targeting, since it is less specific, would it put off customers? I don't think it would put off customers. It's not about, I mean, if you set up a website that's in their language and you can tell that it's written well and there's thought put into the kind of geolocation signals, like the currency is their currency, and if you can get really focus on the high quality language translation, then that's going to be sufficient. So I don't think it'll be off-putting, it'll be sufficient, but to get the best experience, then you would want to focus on country targeting.
Okay. Michael asks a great question here. What does it mean to have a physical presence in the cases where you have to have one to do a ccTLD? What's the minimum or the safe level? What happens if somebody finds out that you don't have a physical presence?
Yeah, so what you need at a bare minimum is to have a physical presence. That could mean, in some countries, it means you need to have an administrative contact that can receive mail. Sometimes it means you need to have a headquarters with staff there. But talking about the bare minimum is not really helpful because we really want to think about what is the purpose, why do domain registrars put up these obstacles that make it so difficult to register? It's because they really want to make sure that these top-level domains that are specifically geared for businesses in those regions, that those businesses are actually operating in those regions. So to really future-proof your SEO and to make sure that you're on the up and up and really focusing on the point of all of this, it's rather thinking about, do I actually have a physical presence in there, or will I have in the near future? And if so, then CCTLDs would be a really good option.
That's great. So next question comes from Annie, who asks if we have any specific advice on best practices for handling specifically French Canadian versus European French, country code versus a language designation.
All right, so Annie, that's a great question. So when you're thinking about different dialects, there's a couple things to keep in mind. First is, if you want to give users in each of those dialects the best experience possible, you'll definitely hire a professional translator who knows that dialect. French Canadians versus European French, they're both French, but they do have very different users, and they're very different parts of the world. So when you're thinking about the best experience, professional localized content is going to be the best. Another thing to think about is duplicate content. So if you have content in just French and you don't do any separation of dialect via a translator, you can run into duplicate content issues. So it's good to hire translators for both of those reasons.
That's great. Ben asks a great related question. If you've already created a country code top level domain structure, but you're realizing it's too much to maintain, what would you suggest?
So yeah, that's a really good point. If you feel like you've kind of overextended your empire and you can't quite handle the maintenance involved with all these top level domains, then thinking about the site migration involved into, say, subdomains or subfolders is, again, it's going to involve all of the thought process that you would need to take into consideration if you were doing a normal site migration. The other things to consider are, if you move from top-level domains to, say, a subfolder, you're going to see a consolidation of your domain authority into that one domain. If you do it correctly, that can be beneficial because you'll be moving several sites that have built up domain authority over time into one consolidated backlink profile. So just make sure that you do that migration correctly, and realize that in doing that, you're going to be losing, you're going to be gaining in domain authority, but you're going to be losing that ability to geo-target at the same level of accuracy.
That's great. Scott asks, for companies that have plans to expand into multiple languages and countries, but don't have the staff in place today to do more than translate, what would you suggest?
I'd suggest in that case to go ahead and purchase the top level domains now, if you can, and start thinking about the future, 2 to 3 years down the line, when you will have the resources to go ahead with those rollouts. You'll have those domains already purchased. I think that about covers it. If you aren't really confident in rolling out several sites or several subdomains, subfolders are a really good option. They take a lot less maintenance. They're really easy to set up. You can probably, with most CMSs, do it in just a few days and then set up geo-targeting for each of those via Webmaster Tools and make sure that your hreflang annotations are in place.
That's great. So let's take a couple of additional questions from GoToWebinar. I think we've got time for probably 2 more. So Joshua asks, would you be concerned with pages sharing images across sites? So different content per US and UK, but the same images shared.
From an SEO perspective, no. It's not going to make a huge difference if you have the same images. But from a user experience perspective, you might want to think about the design and the visuals that will resonate most with those audiences. that's going to take an expert in each of those locations who can sit down and help you think about the best images, stock photography, or whatever would be the best for a UK versus a US audience. And if you look at some of the examples of the big brands that I mentioned in the slides, you'll see that a lot of them have similar images, different wording. Others have completely different interfaces. It really depends on what you're selling and just the amount of resources you have available. I'd say it's always a good idea to think about cultural implications. For example, black in one culture, the color black, might not be the best color, might not have the same connotation in another country. So having a designer in each of those locations give you some feedback can help avoid any cultural gaffes.
I think that's perfectly said. So we've got a great question here from Christina that it probably makes sense to end on. This one is a little bit deep, so follow along. A business that Christina's working with is a hotel chain in Italy that includes 5 of their hotels. They're targeting a global audience. The business has been advised by their SEO to build separate websites, one per hotel, to increase specific location targeting. For example, hotels in Rome. So the question is whether all of the content per hotel needs to be rewritten to manage for duplicate content issues, or if there's a way to indicate to Google that that's okay.
Great question. This really gets to the heart of the purpose of hreflang annotations. So once you implement hreflang across all those 5 sites, what you're essentially doing is you're telling Google, yes, this is pretty much the same content, but it's targeting different users. So there's enough significant changes on the site that warrant, that allow me to target these different users. For example, the currency from site to site is going to be a different default option. And then that being said, so you won't run into duplicate content penalties, but you're not going to be giving the best experience for your users. If you're targeting different audiences that are vastly different, different versions of English or different languages in total, then you want to make sure you're running that content through a writer in that location that can kind of tease out some of the nuances of the language. For example, at my previous company, we were a US company, but we were targeting the UK. And when I build out pages for the UK, I used words like tailor-made, bespoke trips rather than customized vacations. And so that's just an example of thinking about the places where you can vary the language up. That will help with reducing duplicate content as well.
That's great. So let me say thank you for everybody again to Caitlin. I think this was an extremely informative session, and I have to tell everybody that attended, I was extremely impressed with the level of questions that came in. I know we aren't going to get a chance to answer all of them. We'd be happy to follow up with you guys either on social, or feel free to reach out through the contact form on portent.com. We promise that we'll try to have Caitlin come in and answer as many of those as possible. So just quickly before we get up to the hour, I want to make sure that everybody knows that you can join us next month for our April webinar, which is going to be the 30-minute mobile SEO audit with George Freitag. And not that anyone on this call needs a reminder, but just a quick one that Google's mobile algorithm update starts rolling out in mid-April and will take about a week. At this point, a lot of folks are actually predicting that's going to be significantly larger impact than Panda or Penguin. Not that you guys need to know that. But if you do need immediate help with prepping or triage for the mobile friendliness of your site, give us a shout. And in the meantime, make sure you get on the Portent newsletter where we'll be sharing some resources and thoughts from the team on mobile readiness. If you don't want to wait to sign up for that next webinar for the mobile SEO audit, you can head straight to portent.com. It's a little ways down the page on the left, or you can go to our webinar tab on Facebook, which is portent.com. Which is facebook.com/portent.marketing. Thanks everyone, and we'll see you next time.